Did you catch what Bret Bielema said? He was the first coach to talk on day one.
I did not know.
It was so interesting hearing him talk because while he wasn't specifically talking about like this year's team outside of when he was asked questions and he talked about Xavier Scott and the secondary and the defense being much better than it was last year. Um, he talked a lot about the portal and the new era of college football. And he seemed, especially for someone who was a head coach at Wisconsin for more like for over a decade ago, or was the head coach of Wisconsin over a decade ago, back in 2010, 11, even 09, 08. I think 06 was his first year. Almost 2 decades ago was when he was first head coach at Wisconsin. He seemed excited for changes. And they made a lot of transfer portal additions late, and it's better to make them early, but they brought in Terrence Brooks from Texas, and they brought in a lot of really highly graded offensive linemen from lower levels of football to add to an offense that was not good last year. They returned Pat Bryant, and not necessarily for this year, but I'm thinking to myself, is Bret Bielema, is this almost implying that he's going to stick around unless he's fired, and that because he's excited about changes and looks like he wants to stay at Illinois, is he going to be around for a while? And Illinois is just going to be that team who hangs around and maybe pops out for a year.
I think Bielema loves football way too much to walk away right now. I see him coaching for another 5, 10 years, unless he's fired, like you just brought up. Illinois' 2022 team, I feel like that was one of the biggest missed opportunities I've seen recently.
Hmm.
That team was so stacked. That Witherspoon, Sidney Brown, Chase Brown, the amount of their defensive tackles that they had, Randolph and Newton, that team was so good. And I think they started, I could be wrong on this, but it was like 7-1 or 6-1, something
It
like
was
that.
7-1, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they blew that game at home to Michigan State, which was really bizarre. They lost another game and they came into the big house 7-3, almost beat Michigan, dropped to 7-4. That was just such a weird year because it started out and it was like, oh, Bielema's gonna do at Wisconsin what he or do at Illinois what he did at Wisconsin. And then things just unraveled so quick. And then last year, I remember that Kansas game. I think I put like $20 or something on Illinois, and it gets to halftime, and Kansas is
Oh,
just and I'm looking at the TV, and I'm like, what is happening? Is this Bret Bielema's team? Like, did they walk out like a D2 school? I didn't
yeah.
make any sense. So yeah, this year I'm excited to see what Bielema does. I like Illinois a lot. I've always just liked their uniforms, their tradition. So I'm rooting for him. But yeah, I don't see Bielema walking away anytime soon.
I want to like them, like just their team this year, because they bring back a lot, and I mean, Bielema always, whether it was 2022 or more so 2021, he always finds a way to either get in close games that shouldn't be close, or to
Mhm.
win like close games over a team that's better than his, or at least at the time is ranked ahead of his. And in 2022, yeah, the way they dominated Minnesota, the way they destroyed Wisconsin in their own house, and how close they played Michigan, it was a clear indication of this is a good team. I just think that really it's their talent, it's the Big Ten West, and even if you develop well or have a good defense, at the end of the day, I've heard before the phrase defense is a choice, but offense requires like at least a mass base pool of talent to be elite at. I don't know if that's true, but if that theory is correct, it explains like Iowa or Illinois, like outside of some issues that Iowa's had at OC, they can coach up their defense, but when you have Tommy DeVito at quarterback and an offensive line that isn't like Michigan's or Ohio State's was in 2022 or even like Penn State's, even when
Mhm.
you have Chase Brown, you're going to run into some issues. But I like him this year. I don't know if I'm going to pick him to go bowling. Right now, I don't. My Big Ten predictions are pretty set. By the way, if y'all want to watch that video, I imagine all of you have, because it's going to get probably 20,000 views before the season starts. But if you click on my channel link, it's the first thing that comes up. Like, it's posted up there. So check that out. I think I have them at 5-7, and I think next year they'll do very well, because they're a fairly young team. And if they have a big year this year and go bowling, watch out for them to actually be like a top 25 team the following year. But yeah, I agree with you. 2022 was such a missed opportunity. Very missed. And going back to Ohio State a little bit, and actually speaking of 2022 in the offensive line, that unit with Luke Whippler was really good. And last year was a disappointment, but Day said at media days that he, like you mentioned, he likes this offensive line. They have plenty of guys also at the 2 deep that they feel like they can trust. And he even said that you'll see the improvements physically in some of the open practices they have in the next few weeks. What do you make of his confidence there? Do you think any of it's misguided, or do you think it's legit and this O-line is going to push people over?
I think it's legit confidence. I don't know if they're going to bully people per se. I think they're going to improve a lot. We've seen how personal Ryan Day's taken the comments that his team isn't physical enough. They need to run the ball better. Urban Meyer has preached. Now, Ryan Day with C.J. Stroud and Justin Fields and all the receivers they've had, their passing game's been unmatched, against any other college football program. But Urban Meyer, he talks so often about having a running quarterback and how that adds another man for the defense to be accountable for, and how that opens up so many different things. With Ryan Day's offense, obviously they don't do that. And I feel like not having a running quarterback kind of, if not forces, I'm trying to find the right word for it, but it makes the offensive line not softer, but it's like,
it hides the issues.
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah. So I think it's a good confidence from Ryan Day. I like their offensive line. I like the depth. I like what they brought in the portal. Are they going to bully people? I don't think so. But Judkins, he's going to be able to get those 4 or 5 yards on first down. Travion Henderson's still going to be able to make his explosive runs. So it'll definitely be an improved unit. And their overall confidence as a team, I thought they were a little hubristic. Now I get why, because they have, X amount of guys that could have went in the first, second round last year and came back. But they might need to, and, we heard them talking about, we came back because we want a set of gold pants. We want to beat Michigan. That's cool. They're not pounding their chest and saying we're going to do it, but, they might need to calm down a little bit before maybe they talk themselves into something.
Yeah, I did get that feeling a little bit. Now, granted, Michigan spoke openly of their goals in 21, 22, and 23. I didn't really have a problem with that exactly. I almost look at the hubris more not from media days, and I could be wrong here, but more from the standpoint that in the 2022 game against Michigan, Ohio State thought they were going to blow Michigan out, and then the reason they lost is because they had a meltdown over the fact that that game was close. That's what the G. Scott penalty was, is I can't believe you're playing me close, so I'm going to throw the controller across the room. And then last year, they had not the exact same thing, but I think there was a similar confidence that we're going to come in here and show these guys that we're better than them, and their success was fluky, and that just didn't happen. But they should improve on the O-line, and they should beat Michigan this year. And I'm not going to not pick them to do that, because it's Ryan Day, who's a top 5 coach in my opinion, and they easily have a top 3 talent roster and a coaching staff to make that roster into something that can execute well on any given Saturday. What opinion provided by these coaches is bolder? Kirk Ferentz said that he thinks Iowa has the potential to have a good offense. And Rutgers head coach Greg Schiano said that he thinks this team basically is loaded with NFL talent.
I think, I haven't looked at Rutgers depth chart, to be completely honest with you, but I would have to say Schiano's. I like Iowa's offense. I think they're going to be a lot better this year. But wow, I didn't know Schiano said that. That's a pretty bold thing to say.
He alluded to that. That's what I took away from it. Maybe
Okay.
I misinterpreted it, but I'm pretty sure he said like they have several NFL players on that roster.
I mean, I love their running back. I think Kyle Monunga is one of the best running backs in the country. But other than that, I don't know if Lego is still there, their tight end. But I couldn't really name too many guys on that side of the ball. Now, granted, that team is always scrappy. Schiano's a very, physical coach. His teams are always very physical. It's all about being together and the culture. So I don't know. Maybe, yeah, that could happen. But I definitely have to take a look at their roster.
Yeah, I think the Iowa one's bolder solely because their receiver core is terrible. And I hope I'm wrong there. Like I hope that Caleb Brown or Jacob Gill come out of nowhere and just are good. And I think that with Cade there, they return almost all of their offensive linemen. They have a deep stable of running backs, and tight end with Estrenga and Lachey is going to be good. They'll probably be a top 90, top 80, maybe top 70 offense. And if they perform at that level, their defense should be the best in the country based off of what they return and the fact that Phil Parker's their DC. And consequentially, they'll probably beat everyone or at least compete with everyone except for Ohio State in the regular season because their schedule's easy.
Yeah.
But with Rutgers, their O-line grades out as one of the better Big Ten O-lines entering this year. They return a ton. They're exceptional in run blocking. Monungai's good. Christian Dremel is, I wouldn't say an NFL wide receiver, but he's certainly underrated, and Wimsatt didn't help him show his case last year. And Kaliak Manis probably won't either this year. And then defensively, they have Aaron Lewis, Flip Dixon, Robert Longerbeam, at defensive linemen and two defensive backs, respectively. But Mohamed Toure and Powell at linebacker are the really intriguing case. I think I still have to look at the linebacker cores for the other conferences. And by the way, for those of you looking, I'm going to have like a whole All-American selection and other stuff coming out for August, which will be a huge month. I wouldn't be shocked if Rutgers had the best linebacker starting duo in the country. I mean, they're really good. And if I'm wrong, and if you're right, which there's a big chance of that happening, some people may not notice that because Rutgers' schedule's so easy. They don't play Ohio State, they don't play Michigan, they don't play Oregon, they don't even play Penn State. Their toughest game will be either at USC, at Nebraska, could even be at Virginia Tech. That could be their toughest game, is going down to Blacksburg against a team that hasn't been good in nearly a decade since Beamer was there. It's crazy. Like they're going, talk about stat padding. That team could look much more impressive than they actually are. But what do you like about Iowa's offense? I'm curious on that one, actually.
I like their offensive line. If Cade can stay healthy and play the way he did in that 2021 season for Michigan, just be a system quarterback, get the ball where it needs to be on time. Now, like you said, their receiving room isn't very good, but I like their running backs. Caleb Johnson, who isn't even depending on where you look at their depth chart, isn't even the starter right now. I think he's a top 15 running back in college football. I really like what he has on tape. I think they're going to have a really good running game. The fact that Kirk's son is no longer there, the nepotism is done with. I feel like they're going to improve a lot, and their schedule's not too hard. They have to go to Ohio State. They don't play Michigan. I don't think they play Penn State. I don't think they play Oregon.
Nope, they don't. Only Ohio State.
Yeah, so I mean, Iowa, they could be a 10-win team this year, just if their offense improves. I don't know point wise if they were top 100 last year or whatever, but if they're able to improve by 20, 30 spots, 10-2 is a very, very reasonable record for them.
Do you think that if Ohio State looks ahead too much to Oregon and Iowa does have a good offense, do you think there's any chance that, like, just even a 0.1% chance that we could see something happen there? And that's not even my prediction. That's just me asking a question.
I I've looked at that game a lot, and I love Iowa's defense. I love Phil Parker and his philosophy on defense. A lot of the time they sit back in that too high shell and they just let you make mistakes and they capitalize off of it. I I don't think I was going to go in there and win. I don't think there's even like a slim chance of that happening. Now, I think it's going to be a lot closer than what was it 2 years ago when they went in there and their offense turned the ball over what seemed to be 87 times. But I think they could go in there and they could challenge them. They could, cause some concern for the Buckeye faithful in a 30-14 game, a 27-17 game. I wouldn't be shocked if it was a close game, but I can't see them winning that.
Yeah, understandable. I can't either. I do see the challenging portion, but the winning one, no, not really. Potentially more on that really though, depending on how they look. But I I've now gained a reputation based off of my playoff video and my Iowa video. I'm picking them to reach the playoff with an 11-1 record. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I think they're losing to Ohio State, but they're probably going to beat everyone else. And I originally had them going, I think 8-4, 9-3. But then they got Sullivan in the portal, a few other guys, other programs lost some. And I looked at their depth chart with a magnifying glass, and I'm thinking, gosh, like, they're really good at winning one-score games, and they return that entire defense and should have a better offense with Lester. Imagine Iowa if they know how to win one-score games. What happens when they build, like, two-score leads with that defense? Most offenses won't be able to overcome that, even if it's Iowa trying to hold on for that lead for 30 minutes. And then finally, or do you have something to say?
I was just going to add to that because most of the time, Iowa sits back in their base defense and allows you to make mistakes. And if their offense is able to get them up by 2 possessions and force the opposition to take riskier plays, that could start a snowball effect and games could get out of hand really quick. So,
yeah, I think you're going to see that happening a lot. And I would look for whether it's Wisconsin or Nebraska. Those will be teams that I think will be pretty good on offense, but they have some question marks. They're home games in Iowa, and I think those games will be like, Wisconsin, Notre Dame from a few years back, where when Notre Dame took the fourth quarter lead, it just got totally out of control.
That's a great way to put it.
It's probably what Iowa will do to some of the more competent teams they face that aren't Ohio State, but like the next tier or two below is they'll just begin to force them into errors. And then finally, UCLA and USC, the two schools from LA. Deshaun Foster and Lincoln Riley both spoke today. And it was interesting listening to them because on one hand, Deshaun Foster basically got up to the podium and had one of the worst opening press conferences that I could have ever watched. You could tell that he was excited. You could tell that he was overwhelmed, and I can't blame him. He went from being a running backs coach who was really good at his job to probably the most unproven head coach in the country. And Chip Kelly didn't leave him in a good spot. He just didn't. I mean, even before Foster was the head coach, I thought this team was going to be bad. And now they have a brand new head coach with a staff that I also look at the staff. And a lot of these staffers are from the FCS or non-Division I football. Like even Bielema, he hasn't been in college football in a while. So it's interesting. And people look at that and they say, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing. And there may be some truth to that, but I don't know. But then you look at Lincoln Riley and USC, and the fact that Riley, if he really has been in on this transitioning to the Big Ten for as long as USC has been, he's probably known almost since he got there that that was going to be the plan, or that was in the works to a certain degree, if he had that communication with his AD. You look at him retaining Grinch, that's a I don't know what I'm doing move. And you look entering this year, and despite all the confidence that I heard from him at media days, they have questions on the O-line, and D'Anton Lynn, he's a miracle worker. He's a top 10 DC in the country. UCLA losing him hurt, but Jim Knowles is a top 5 defensive coordinator, I think, in the country, and he couldn't take Ohio State's defense to top 10 in year one. They were good, great for much of the year, but against offenses that were physical and that could create big plays, his defense fell apart. USC wasn't even top 100 in almost any category last year, except for maybe sacks and turnovers forced. How high... Let me rephrase that question. What are UCLA and USC going to do in the Big Ten long term? Will they succeed? Will they fail? Will they be mediocre?
I think, UCLA is in a horrible spot right now. It's going to take a lot of time for them to get back to a respectable program. Since Kelly left and Dante Moore transferred to Oregon, I kind of threw them in the pit of despair, and I haven't even looked at their depth chart in probably a month or two. USC, I am not very high on at all, and I made a post on Instagram a little while back, and I just started a YouTube channel, and one of the videos I did was a preview on them. It was just a short 10-minute video, and I had a couple fans say, "This guy has no idea what he's talking about." Like, Buddy's gonna find out really soon, because I don't think USC is gonna be very good this year. Now, like I said, I watched some Miller Moss tape, and he had a really good game against Louisville, but that's not a great defense. I think with what Lincoln Riley was hired to do, the expectation was he wasn't going to get them back to a Pete Carroll level, but he was going to make them a top 10 team every year. And last year, how they looked with having the best player in all of college football, it was a shocker, and it was really disappointing. Now you lose Caleb Williams. You have Miller Moss coming in. You still have some skilled players. Zachariah Branch is a great receiver. Bear Alexander is a great defensive lineman. But with their schedule, I think, the one thing that really riled up USC fans was that I said I think LSU is going to blow them out in that game at Allegiant Stadium in Vegas.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think LSU is going to win that game by 17, 20 points. I think they're going to lose to Michigan. I know they play Penn State. I think Penn State's going to beat them. I see USC going 8-4, maybe even 7-5 this year.
That's hilarious. The reason why it's hilarious is, and to my credit, or no, to your credit, you may have done more research on LSU than even I have. So I don't know. This opinion may change. I picked USC to upset LSU and then lose 5 or 6 games, because I think LSU has questions at running the ball. And I think the key to beating USC, because they brought in some really good secondary players, the key is going to be if you run on them, they won't beat you. Because I don't know what's stopping. I don't know what on their, or who or what on their defense is stopping the ground game. But I'll have to watch your USC video, because I don't have a read on USC, which is why I'm picking them to not do well. Because for all the other Big Ten teams, I feel like I have some type of read that's like positive in some way, whether for the future or this year. And for USC, I think that next year, if they hold on to Riley, they'll be really good, because year 2 with Lynn, I think, will produce results. But this year, I could see them going 10-2, and with that schedule, a 10-2 USC, like 95% sure gets in the playoff.
Yep.
but I could also see them going like as bad as 5-7 or 6-6. Like they could be a disaster. They could be one of the best teams in college football. They could, I think, if everything comes together, they could win it all because their offense, is going to be good, and their defensive staff is now one of the best in the country compared to one of the worst last year. And I agree with you about UCLA. They're not in a good position, and their schedule. I mean, they have LSU in the non-conference, and then they play Oregon, they play Iowa, they have a road trip to Penn State, and I think a road trip to Rutgers too, road trip to Nebraska. A lot of travel time, big non-conference opponent. I feel like you gotta give Deshaun Foster. I almost got him mixed up with D'Anton Lynn just because both their names start with a D, and both were on UCLA's staff last year. But I think you got to give Foster time to settle in and see if there's just anything encouraging from this year, and then you can probably, like after 2025, you can probably properly assess him and his staff and his roster, because this year is just, if they somehow go bowling or 7-5, he should get coach of the year, or he should at least be like a contender for coach of the year, because there would be a ranked upset win there somewhere if they achieve that record.
Yeah, it's just about keeping their head above water. They got to get that thing rebuilt. They don't even have a foundation right now. So, yeah, it's a tough job. It's a tough place to be. But I will tell you, I don't know how much you've looked at Michigan State, but that's a team that I think I'm a lot higher on than most. I think Jonathan Smith has an opportunity to possibly go 7-5, 8-4 year one.
I agree with that. What do you think, before we end it off here, what do you think about Michigan State long term? I know that Smith spoke and he talked about how he doesn't really want to temper expectations. Not like, of course, talk about winning it all this year or next year, but he isn't trying to preach patience in a cautionary way. And he views that this team does have players. What do you think about him long term with a coach as good as Smith?
I think they're going to have a lot of success there with what he was able to do at Oregon State. And I understand the Pac-12 is a lot different than the SEC. It's a lot different than the Big Ten, but they're not able to recruit, even, a good amount of 4 stars, but they were a run the ball team. And did they have the success that Harbaugh had at Stanford? No, but it was very similar, where it was, we're just going to smash you in the mouth because we're not going to allow a talent gap on the outside at the skill positions to affect the game as much as it can. Bringing in Vealing, their tight end from Oregon State, Childs, Nathan Carter is back. I know they lost Simeon Burrow to Miami. Derek Harmon went to Oregon. But they still have some guys on their D-line. Their linebacking core is really good. Cal Halliday, Jordan Hall. I think they were able to bring in another couple of transfers. I could see it could go this year specifically. They could start out 4-0. Then they have that brutal stretch. They could lose 4 straight, and then they could win another 4 games to end the year and go 8-4. And I wouldn't be surprised at all. But under Jonathan Smith, I think that's going to be a consistent 8-9 win team.
Yeah, I think that in fact, I think in a few years you'll see them make a run for something, because they were really good the past 2 years at Oregon State. With Childs at quarterback, you wondered that if he just continued to be at Oregon State and build what he had, if they could make a run at something greater than just 10 or 9 wins, which is incredible at Oregon State as is. At Michigan State, you can recruit better. You have way better support. You have more resources, especially next year when you're going to be allowed to directly pay players. And I think Smith's one of the best coaches in the Big Ten, like based off of resume. And he could, depending on what happens in the next 2-3 seasons, he could make a name for himself as being that guy that not only does more with less, but that took Michigan State back to where D'Antonio had them, or just a more modernized version.
Yeah, and I like his phrasing too: low ego, high output. because that's what they had to have at Oregon State. And, like you said, he has more resources at MSU, but is he going to be able to recruit at a Oregon, USC, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State level? No.
No.
But he's going to get a lot more 4-stars, and the way he develops players. And I just like him as a person. He just seems like a simple guy that it's show up to work, do your job, do it well. And that's gonna do really well in East Lansing.
Yeah. When the rumors about Harbaugh leaving Michigan after 2023 were coming out in the preseason last year, or some of it was the middle of the season, and some of it was even during the whole sign stealing stuff, like before Moore was named as the interim, I wanted, outside of maybe Sharon Moore and giving him the job, I wanted Kalen DeBoer or Jonathan Smith. And I think for very good reasons, and the fact that both of them are going to be in the future unanimously viewed as top 5 coaches.
Yeah, because when those rumors were circulating, I hope I'm getting his name right. Is it Matt Campbell, the head coach at Iowa State?
Yeah. Oh no.
Yeah,
no.
that's what everyone was saying. But Matt Campbell, like, he should be the Michigan. I was like, absolutely not. No, I would. Oh my God, I would take Jonathan Smith over him 1,000 times out of 1,000. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. He was a guy that I was hoping Michigan would interview if Harbaugh had left, because yeah, he's just a really solid coach. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's a former walk-on. He walked on to Oregon State, and I think as their starter, he had a 10 or 11 win season there. He's just a winner, just a straight up winner. So
yeah, very admirable, very cerebral, intelligent schemer. And last thing I'll say before we end is his strength and conditioning coach. Talk about something that will make or break programs at the highest level. I think it's been a problem at Ohio State. I think that it's actually been a little bit of a problem, like even at Iowa for the previous few years. They had Chris Doyle, and then the whole like investigation that they had with the whole like racial bias stuff, and then he resigned, they parted ways, and I think they promoted from within, and their offensive line just hasn't been the same. So strength and conditioning's super important. And Mike McDonald at Michigan State, he is one of the better strength and conditioning coaches in the country. And what you said about Oregon State just pounding the rock and low ego but high output, that goes right back to strength and conditioning. So that's another good sign.